Today we're going to read chapters 12 and 13 in the Littles. We left off last chapter with um, everybody left the apartment, and Tom and Lucy hurried down the secret passageway. Oh my god, we don't have the ring! Tom and Lucy followed part of the way. When no one was looking, the two children turned off for Mrs. Long's bedroom. Chapter 12. Mr. Button opened a trap door in the Longs' living room. He signaled for everyone to be quiet. Then he led them through the door. They stood on the fireplace mantelpiece. The trap door was part of the wallpaper design. Mr. Button closed the door and no one could see it from the inside of the living room. Mr. Button whispered, "We are standing behind a clock on the mantelpiece. The clock looks like a house." There was a small hole in the back of the clock. Mr. Button climbed through. "Follow me," he whispered. There was room to move around inside the clock without getting caught in the machinery. In front of the clock house were doors and windows. The Littles could see into the Longs' living room where big people were moving around and talking. There were wooden dolls standing in the doors and windows of the clock house. They faced into the Longs' living room. The dolls looked like statues to the tiny people. "Now here's my plan," Mr. Button said. "As you can see, we're very close to where the wedding is going to take place. If you look out, you can see the minister. He's the gentleman in the black suit." The Littles looked and nodded. "When the wedding march is played, the big bride and her father are going to walk into the living room and up to where the minister is standing right in front of this clock," Mr. Button said. "How thrilling," Della said. "We'll be able to see and hear everything that takes place," said Mr. Button. Then he chuckled. "Now here is my greatest idea." The tiny man took hold of a wooden statue that was standing at the window of the clock house. He gave it a pull, and it came loose from its holder on the floor. "What are you up to, Button?" Uncle Pete said. "Now, Darrell," said Mr. Button, "when I take the statue away from the window, I want you to take its place." "Hold on there," said Uncle Pete. "Do you mean," Mr. Little said, "that you want Darrell to stand right in that window where all those big people can see him?" "They may look at the clock, but they won't see Darrell," said Mr. Button. "People see what they expect to see, and no person expects to see a 6-inch human being standing in a clock." "Are you sure?" Uncle Pete asked. "I've stood in these windows quite a few times myself just to test it," Mr. Button said. "Even when a big person looks at the clock to see what time it is, he doesn't really pay attention to these statues. It's really quite amazing. Come on, Darrell. Let's go. Try it." "I'm ready," said Cousin Darrell. He stood next to the window. Mr. Button got a good hold onto the statue. "All right," he said. "Get set. Go." Mr. Button quickly moved the wooden statue away from the window. Cousin Darrell stepped into its place. He looked out at the living room. About 15 people were sitting there. The minister stood in front of them with his back to Cousin Darrell. The people kept looking at the door and talking in low voices. Mr. Button took another statue away. Della stepped into the place next to Cousin Darrell. Now she too was watching what was going on in the Longs' living room. "It's getting close to the time," Mr. Button said. "Let's get everyone into place." He pointed to a spot near Cousin Darrell. "The best man should stand here." Uncle Pete moved into the place. "That's me," he said. "And now, Mr. Little, you're giving the bride away," said Mr. Button. "You should stand here." Mr. Little did as he was told. "And the matron of honor goes about here," Mr. Button said. Mrs. Little moved quickly into the place pointed out to her. "Now the ring bearer should stand next to the best man," said Mr. Button. "And the flower girl goes next to the matron of honor." "The children aren't here," Mr. Little said. He looked around. Uncle Pete ran to the back of the clock. He looked out. "I don't think they ever got here," he said. "Oh dear," said Mrs. Little. "Tom has the ring." "I'd better get them," Uncle Pete said, and he hurried out of the clock. In the meantime, Cousin Darrell and Della were standing in the clock window. They tried to keep from moving. The minister turned around and looked right at the clock. Then he looked at his wristwatch. Suddenly he turned and leaned on the mantelpiece. He was only a few inches away from Della and Cousin Darrell. They stood very still. The minister began to examine the things on the mantelpiece as he waited for the wedding to begin. He looked at the photograph. He picked up a small bird made of glass. Then he looked the clock over carefully. Cousin Darrell and Della stood stiff as boards. The minister reached up and slowly ran his fingers over the top of the clock house. The people in the room kept on talking in low voices and looking at the door. The minister reached right in front of the two tiny people. They stopped breathing. The man touched one of the wooden statues. Cousin Darrell saw the minister looking at him. He knew he was going to be next. You see him? Chapter 12. While the wedding party was crowding into the clock house, Tom and Lucy were in Mrs. Long's room looking for a ring. The two tiny children crawled over a jumble of things on the woman's dresser. Lucy tripped over backwards over a hair curler. "Let's get going," Tom said. "Get up, we have to hurry." The children looked around the dresser top. "It has to be here somewhere," Tom said. There it is." It was Mrs. Long's box for broken jewelry. The box was jammed with broken jewels, beads, and buttons. Tom dug around in the box for a few minutes. He pulled out a tiny round link for a chain. "This will fit Della's finger," he said. "It's a little too thick, isn't it?" Lucy said. "It's the best we're going to find," Tom said. "There's nothing in this box that's better. We don't have time to look anyplace else." "Golly," said Lucy. "We're always hurrying. Haste does make waste, I guess." "Oh, stop it, Lucy," Tom said. "Don't be that way. Come on, let's find some glue and stick the ruby on." They found some glue in Mrs. Long's desk. "It's some of that good white stuff that Mr. Big uses," Tom said. "It really sticks." Lucy stood on the tube of glue and squeezed the drop out. Tom took the ruby out of his pocket and glued it to the ring. The children blew on the glue to make it dry faster. "It looks pretty good," Lucy said. "I thought it was going to look beautiful." "It is beautiful," Tom said. "I'll make one just like it for you when you get married." Just then they heard music. "What's that?" said Tom. "Listen," Lucy said. Then she shouted, "That's the wedding march! We've got to get back!" She started to run. "Hold it, Lucy," said Tom. "I just remembered. We don't even know where everybody's standing." "Tom," Lucy said, "we'll miss the wedding." We'll have to wait and see what it finds out next time for the last chapter. Okay, friends. I'll see you soon. Bye.